So thank you for being back, all of you, and thank you, Anna, Halime, Ivana, Eva, for being actively present with us this Friday afternoon. It's an honor to introduce to you Professor Anne van Hoestenberghe, who was introduced to me by Professor Christine Bartik from École Polytechnique at ULB. And she said, you should really try to engage more with the engineering side as well. So we always welcome input and creativity and connections. So thank you for this introduction. Professor van Hoestenberghe did her research or is doing her research in the field of neurotechnologies, from technological innovation to their interactions with the human nervous system. She develops technology for the next generation of implantable electronic devices to improve the quality of life of patients. She leads MICE, a national facility of manufacturing of active implants and surgical instruments housed at St. Thomas Hospital. It's an interdisciplinary team bringing together engineers and experts in regulatory affairs to support researchers, whether in academia or SMEs, to bring their ideas to the first test in humans. Professor van Hoestenberghe was trained as an engineer at ULB and TU Eindhoven in the Netherlands and did her PhD at UCL. Afterwards, she worked in Germany and Australia, and she cares for diversity, equality, and inclusivity, and actively seeks new strategies to develop more inclusive learning spaces and improve the university experience of non-mainstream students. So in this interdisciplinary program, she's the perfect expert to present to you the next generation technology of implantable devices to increase the quality of life of patients. And thank you, Professor, for being with us, for taking some time to introduce the students to your research.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. I hope you can all hear me and see my screen.
We can, thank you.
Brilliant, and I've moved the little banner. So, well, to start and again to reiterate, thank you very much for the introduction and this opportunity. When I first received the email, I thought, oh, what do I have to teach to you as a cohort? Because you're already studying interdisciplinarity in healthcare innovation. You're already thinking about taking the innovation and making it a standard of care. So I had to sit for a moment and think about whether I felt that standing in front of you, although we're all online, how intimidating that would be. And I've put together a presentation which to some of you may be evident, but in which I'm trying to really explain the main motivators of innovation in medical device, specifically the next generation of implantable devices. And then I'm also going to introduce some of these devices. So I hope you'll find this both interesting and probably enlightening in some elements at least. I understand that some of you have a lot of experience in some of these areas, so I'm going to go relatively quickly on the first few slides to bring us before the midpoint of this presentation to introducing devices. Before, though, I really wanted to start by reiterating what we think as engineers when we work in healthcare engineering. And why do we innovate? What is our motivation? Ultimately, it is to improve quality of life. We are not the actors of the delivery of the improvement in terms of the medical care, clinical care given, but we innovate for the same purpose, improving quality of life, including improving healthcare services. How is our innovation achieving these goals? Either because we support the creation of medical devices, in which case the goal is only achieved when we have clinical adoption, which stresses the importance for us of understanding the whole pathway and understanding the key stakeholders, their ways of working, and the ways that we can integrate existing clinical care plans. We can also, through healthcare engineering innovation, create what I'll term basic science devices. These are devices that aren't primarily designed to provide a clinical service. They are designed to provide an understanding of physiological processes. So there may be wearable or implantable devices whose main purpose is to educate us as a community on some physiological processes. They're very common in already in use in some conditions that are chronic or evolving, such as motor neuron disease. Then we may also innovate at the earliest technology readiness level. We may create new methods and new technologies that are then used in novel medical devices or basic science devices produced by others. So when interacting with engineers working in innovation in healthcare, you may sometimes think that we're very, very far away from translation, but all of us are motivated by the same ultimate goal, even when we create the earliest stage of technology development, which is to improve quality of life in healthcare, which is why most people do have this vision of clinical adoption or translation to practice in their translation pipeline. Most of us do, however, work somewhere around here. So usually technology is accompanied at the very earliest stage with clinical knowledge. Ideally, this is from the fortuitous meeting of clinicians or people delivering care in the community with people with an engineering and technical knowledge, so that the ideation stage is informed, educated by the needs of the patient, the needs of the clinicians. By the time we get to technical feasibility, the leadership is really passed on to the engineers. And this pattern, this model is relatively similar to, in the early stages, to the development of pharmacology. It changes at the stage of design and development because of the access to manufacturing products. What is often misunderstood by engineers is the pathway that I've drawn in dotted lines here. And this misunderstanding leads to a lot of product failing at this stage, not because they may not have had efficacy, but because the people who designed them didn't understand how to jump that gap and reach that stage. So today I thought, before I talk to you about devices, I'd introduce a little bit more of what happens in this dotted line. Some of you may be familiar with other ways of presenting the translational pathway, where everything that I've showed you so far is called discovery science, and then you have a lot of focus on the 4 tiers of translation. First, test in humans, translation to patients, translation into practice, which is really the adoption of the community. Your device is no longer seen as something that's odd, unique, and used in research only, but is supported by an evidence base to be translated into broad use. And then we see the translation to the community as the 4th tier of translation. My interest is to show you how this can be represented from an engineering point of view, rather than this vision, which is usually presented from clinical point of view. So I've put them side by side to start with, where we knew that we had ideation and then basic research. We need to translate to human, to patient, and then to practice. I'm going to leave the translation to the community assumed to come after this stage. So this is what we have: translation to human, translation to patient, and then translation to practice. From an engineering point of view, what do I think if I use different terms? Well, from the prototype development, I have this great big red box, which is everything that's a mystery to the engineers that results to the first use in patient. The most important ones in here are the regulatory documentation. This is necessary and should be conceived from the moment of technical feasibility. Why? Because of the need for the technical file, which I think most of you will have heard about. It's part of the regulatory pathways. A technical file documents the design and development process and the specification of the device, and it needs to collect every instances of test made that have influenced the quality and the efficacy, the security of the final version of the product. So these starting point here, if it is ignored until that stage, usually requires cycling back to technical feasibility documentation. This is why in educating the next generation of engineers, we really encourage them to see a triangular relationship between feasibility, product design, and regulation before prototype development. This is also essential in terms of translation to human, because at that stage, feasibility and product design is when the human factor interactions are considered. So usability, how your key targeted group will interact with your product may lead to significant redesigns. And again, this needs to be collected as part of your evidence base, what will be submitted to your regulator. I've also separated from translation to human to translation to practice the stage of demonstrating efficacy and performance, which are the first, beyond the first safety trial, which are the trials that are meant to demonstrate in the EU the essential safety and performance requirements, or the general safety and performance requirements if you're working in the UK. So if we look at this, there's still an element that's missing here. I just want to illustrate this very briefly. This is something that's been known for decades and more. We know that it takes, that the challenges to translation are obviously the time it takes, the cost of it, and I'll have a slide on this later. I've already mentioned the importance of regulatory approval, which is often misunderstood. It is not in itself challenging if it's well understood. Nevertheless, most innovators regard regulatory approval as a sort of mysterious black box, a barrier that is to be feared. When it is understood, it can be navigated much more straightforwardly. There is another element of risk, which I think you are all going to be experts, so I won't say very much on it, which we tend to call the innovation risks, which when we are developing early TRL technologies, we know that industry or commercial investors won't be interested until we have broken the back of some of the most innovative risks. Once we've demonstrated feasibility of these innovative elements, then we are, or technology is ready for further investment. So I'm not going to touch more upon this. The final one I want to talk about, so these are just illustration papers from about 5-10 years ago that illustrated the different risk. They mention here approvals for the use of experimental devices in humans comprise manufacture of such devices under design control protocols and compliance with quality assurance practices. And this is a challenge unique to devices. In this, some extent, you'll see the same need to manufacture pharma under the same control protocols, but access to manufacturing clean rooms for devices is very restricted. There aren't enough, especially if you go for class 2 and class 3 devices. The more complex the device, the more intensive the control, the more costly the maintenance of the processes of quality assurance within the manufacturing environments are. So we see a unique challenge to translation, which is access to manufacturing spaces that perform design control and quality compliance. So if we have access to that, the process should look something like that. So this is a rewriting of your traditional translational pipeline focused on healthcare innovation from the point of view of an engineer. So I have expanded this. The purpose of me showing you this is that whilst I ignored I didn't know you, I wasn't aware of your background, I assume that you will be interacting with people from a very broad range of backgrounds, and you'll all speak different languages, you'll all have different visions of this. I'm just going to illustrate this, for example, as how is this translational pipeline seen by regulators? Oops, sorry. This is my pipeline shown to you as what I believe is representative of an engineering thought process. And this is what a regulator thinks. Concepts, and then technical file. Technical file is held here in that little drawing here, followed by approval and certification, meaning that in their third, in their representation, the concept includes all of that up to here. This can represent 10 years of development into your concept. And then what I have barely illustrated here is the post-market surveillance after the launch, which I've included somewhere in this space without specifying it. So I just wanted to show you how we all think of translation. We think we speak the same language. We think we see the same challenges, but our understanding of barriers to translation are very much influenced by our own background. And we should be aware of that so that when we work in multidisciplinary teams, we understand that we may need to adjust our expectations of timelines based on what we know. Right, talking about timelines and adjustment of expectations, you can find much more detailed maps, such as developing the one I showed you. This one comes from a website called strategyinc.net. It's called Time to Medical Device Commercialization. It's getting on a little bit, it's 2017, but overall you can see that they have a pipeline of about 10-15 years, depending on how long it takes to go through each of these stages. And they have introduced the manufacture, they have introduced the risk management, your human factor usability alongside your product design, and then also throughout the development, your compliance and regulatory support. So you'll find more details online of such maps like the ones I just showed you. But how long does it really take if we're specifically talking about active implantable medical devices, which is really the focus of what I'm now going to talk about? I want to illustrate this with a relatively simple device. So this is relatively simple because it's an artificial sphincter that helps closing the urethra. So it's wrapped around externally around the urethra, and this serves the purpose of controlling the pressure applied around the cuff based on the abdominal pressure. So for anybody who understands what it is to suffer from stress incontinence, where a person may be generally continent, but when they cuff, when they laugh, or when they maybe lift a heavy load or go from sitting to standing, make an effort in the staircase, they may find themselves slightly incontinent. If we have an artificial urethra that is constantly exerting a large pressure on the urethra, this is going to lead to a foreign body reaction around the cuff, which means that it has a limited lifetime in the body, and it's not efficacious as a solution. So what these people proposed is a pressure sensor that adapts the closure of the urethra based on the internal abdominal pressure to make sure that only the minimal amount of pressure is applied whilst maintaining continence. It's a fairly simple process in itself. It relies on a method for manufacturing the package here. This is well established. So the innovation lies purely around the pressure control of the cuff. That's a single innovation point. And they very proudly announced just over a year and a half ago their first in-human study. So that's the first stage. It is not yet your large-scale clinical trial. This is not yet your proof of efficacy. This is your safety study. And that was in 2022. Based on what I could find online, the first patent is 2007. So there's already a 15 years difference. And I also found information that PhDs were started about 5 years earlier. So we have a 20 years timeline from the initiation of the idea to the first in human study. And that's how long it takes. You can accelerate this process. So these sort of maps you might have seen, you might be familiar with them. So this is usually called the translational gap map, where you know that early innovation development can benefit from centralized research funds, government research funds, or charitable research funds. And then later on, we look for commercial investments or some clinical research funds. And we're familiar with the fact that there is a gap here in the stage when one decreases before the other one picks up. This is our UK map, more complicated. It's UK landscape only, but I just wanted to show you that we sometimes talk about two translation maps. Although these maps are useful, I find them rather focused on where the gaps are rather than an overall idea of cost and time. So I really like Claude Clément's very simple map, which he presented specifically around brain-computer interfaces, where he said, as a rule of thumb, if you have $100 million and a minimum of 10 years of development, you have a certain chance of success. If you want to increase your chances of success, you can either invest more or spend more time developing it. And you can, if you have a significant amount of investment, even accelerate your development process. And this was presented in 2022. It's been true before. It's still true now, and we're seeing a lot of evidence of that with the various BCIs that are coming up. Those that were underinvested because they were mainly research projects took well over 20 years to reach the stage of first in human and then see their patient numbers increase very slowly. The more recent ones that have benefited from a much larger amount of investment have certainly accelerated this process, as well, of course, as benefiting from all of the innovation that has come prior to their own work. So that's it for the sort of contextualization of the rest of this talk, which will focus on active implants. I'm going to start by giving you one slide of context on that, which is that we talk about active implants and technology, neurotech in particular. Throughout our life, we are exposed to it from sci-fi, but also from the news. I took these articles all from a Belgian website. All of them are relatively recent, just to illustrate the fact that this isn't just something that is unique to the US. It's very much worldwide, and I'm going to try to illustrate this with examples of research and implementation use of devices that also encompass worldwide examples. So we know that we're not exclusive to some countries. To start, before talking about the future of sci-fi, let's look at what the present of sci-fi looks like. So the first device that we forget about because it's so well established is the pacemaker. Yet when you think about it, a pacemaker is a pretty phenomenal device because it's inserted within the heart, and you can really see it here, and it sustains people's life. It is literally a life-sustaining device. It can also be life-changing in as much as it returns patients to states of health and well-being that they hadn't had for some of them for decades before the treatment. So I don't need to tell you more about that, only that we sometimes forget when we look at the matrix, everything that we already benefit from. And I'm going to illustrate this even more with the next example, which is cochlear implants. I think cochlear implants are remarkable for several reasons. The first one is they're designed to be used for a lifetime. And I really mean for a lifetime. There is not a single time in the life of a person who's evolved in a hearing world, who's been able to hear from their youngest age thanks to technology. There isn't a single time to tell them, well, you know what, your operating system is outdated, your device is too old, we can't replace it, we can't repair it. Your mobile phones can be replaced. All of your technology can be replaced. Something that is implanted cannot be replaced. And it's really important to understand the idea of how reliable these devices have to be for their implanted part. And all of the innovation that will change over time has to be placed in the externalized part. This is extremely important. So here we see this sort of images, which you're going to find, depending on which country you Google, you will find same images. So across the world, children are benefiting from cochlear implants. Just want to explain for those of you who may not be familiar, yes, you will always see an external part with a cochlear implant, which is there, as I said, to listen, to be the external part, embed the electronics that will be changed as and when or our software improves the sound processing. But there is also an implanted part underneath the skin and slightly embedded into the skull. They dig a very small cavity to place the implant, and then the electrode array is inserted into the cochlea. I'm going to zoom in onto that area. So this is where there's a very small window into the cochlea, and the surgeons with extreme precision have to push the electrode array, which has to be made in such a way that it is solid enough, resistant enough to go through the window, but flexible enough to curve into the cochlea, becoming thinner and thinner in its design so that it can reach at least 2 to 2.5 turns into the cochlea. Why? Because of the need for the people to hear a range of frequency, and the hair cells into the cochlea respond to different frequencies at different positions inside this progressive coiled structure. So it's really important to reach this. And the feat of engineering that has made these devices so flexible, so soft, so thin, and yet reliable to sustain this interface between the human-made and the biological for periods of over 70 years is remarkable. So in terms of reliability, as I've been mentioning this a lot, every series of, this is publicly available data from Cochlear, one of the largest manufacturer of cochlear implants. And you can see over time, so we have 33 years of data for the older generation of devices. And after 33 years of their old generation, they had 90% reliability. If you think about that, that means that these devices were first put into the market in the 1980s. So technology made in the 1970s was already capable of achieving 90% reliability after 33 years in the body. To give you an idea of the environment of the body, it's like putting your mobile phone into salted water, turning it on and waiting 30 years and see how it works. What's even more remarkable is that every generation after, so these are newer generation, we have less data in terms of length of data recorded, but we see that their reliability improves. All of the gray lines are devices that have been retired, and I'm going to touch upon this one, where we also see the dramatic effect of an innovation that wasn't suitably or sufficiently tested for long-term reliability, because testing to see whether a device will succeed or fail after 5 years requires a very long period. And sometimes this is just not done sufficiently. So they retired this device early because its performance was below what would have been expected. We see, however, in the most recent devices, again, that every generation of the product increases its reliability, so that over even 30 to 50 years, we're going to see very little failure. The target being a device for life, absolutely, literally. So that's enough on the cochlear implant, but that certainly is a great illustration of where healthcare innovation has continued to improve the quality of life of the patients. The next device I'm going to talk about, again, the Sci-Fi of Now, and these are also very well-established devices. They're deep brain stimulators. So very briefly, that Medtronic is one of the bigger manufacturers of deep brain stimulators. Here is an example of a person with 2 stimulators implanted. I like this image because it makes us realize that the electrodes are going quite deep. This isn't just sort of just underneath the surface. So the surgical planning to identify the location of the electrode and a pathway to insert the electrode without causing damage to any of the other neural structures of the brain is extremely challenging. I'm just going to show you, before I talk more about the pathway, I hope this will work, the efficacy of deep brain stimulator. I don't think, although it's a very well-established device, I don't know how many of you have seen such videos before. There's loads of them on YouTube. I'm just going to play 2 versions of it. Do you have the sound when this was working or not?
No.
I don't hear
Okay.
the sound. No.
Let me just, if I can have a moment to try to find the setting for the sound. If anybody wants to give me an idea of where to look. Sound setting, sense.
I'm looking, but I can't find.
Okay, let's try that again. I've pressed on something called Optimize for video sharing. So we'll see. Let me know if you hear the sound.
With
Yes.
the power on.
Yes.
I'm not making.
Right, so what you saw, basically, that person, I don't know if you heard the beginning, but he said, it's me with the power on. So he's not making any efforts. This is working for him. He's moving his fingers very clearly. And now we're going to see him.
Me when I turn it off.
Okay, I should add that this is real time. There's been no editing. So he's just turned it off. At 4 seconds of the video, he's turned it off.
You won't be able to read that, it's shaking too much. So it's almost an instantaneous reaction. I can't control this. Could shake some quality cocktails with the right. The left just looks like the royal wave. My voice is gone. It's harder for me to get words out and speak. I'm completely rigid, and if I tried to stand up I'd fall. If anyone thinks I'm faking this, I'm not. I can't control the tremors and dyskinesia. The twisting in my neck is called dystonia and is really quite uncomfortable. So as you can see, the tremors are getting much worse and I'm in quite a bit of discomfort, and I'm about to drop the remote control, which will be fun because I won't be able to turn myself back on. So I think party time is over. Almost automatically.
Right, so I hope you saw how remarkable existing technologies are. This is no, in fact, that video, as you can tell by the quality, is quite old. I mean, this is certainly predating TikTok, isn't it? But the fact is, people are sharing these videos online publicly because this technology changes their life, absolutely changes their life. And I just want to say a little bit about the engineering input into that. It's obviously not just the device. This itself is a feat of engineering. I want to talk specifically about the engineering that enables the clinical surgical team to plan and target the areas without causing any further damages to these people. What I mean is that the brain is not an area where you have a very clear map. This is what we do. We put colors on it. But when you look at the brain, it's all the same. It doesn't have a little purple, a little red bit, and a little blue bit. And the clinical teams have to identify targets and then go and drill into this and pierce an electrode, deciding which direction they're going to arrive at. And the degree of precision that they're managing to reach, I just take this scan to show you the size of the target. This is the size of the target in the whole of the brain, that tiny little edge of the very small pink area. And I'm an engineer, so I'm not even going to try to name the location. But this is what it looks like. The scan's all gray to me. And having thousands of innovators working on the physics of the imaging so that they can distinguish in this gray on gray the target areas and then plan it in 3 dimensions to minimize the damage to the other areas, and then transfer this so that the surgeons can then perform this task is, to me, absolutely remarkable, especially if I show you this image. Now, I'm not going to play all of the videos that you can find online, but you can Google DBS surgery violin or any combination of these words. This guy's called Roger Fritz, but it's not the only musician who played his instruments during surgery so that the surgeons could adjust with extreme precision the position of the electrodes. This person suffers specifically from a form of tremor that increases as he tries to focus on a precise movement, and he's a professional violinist. So to know that together engineers and clinicians have managed to create a technology, not just the implant, the whole thing, all of the engineering that's gone into imaging, into the robotics, into the stereotactic frames, into translating and integrating all of that, so that Roger here and any other patient can perform the task that they are expert at during surgery, so that the surgeons can be so precise. I think that, to me, illustrates that sci-fi is here and now. And frankly, we have a lot to learn when we think that this is all in the future. Right, so I've gone on a little bit about what I think is fantastic about engineering in surgery. I'm going to now talk to you about another type of devices, and there are those that use electrical stimulation to assist with movement. So this is the sort of typical things that you'll see if yourself or a person you care for has had need for rehabilitation, possibly after a fall or after surgery for example, hip replacement. So this is kind of typically used where electrical pulses are being sent to these muscles. The muscles may be weak from bed rest post-surgery or from complete paralysis. And yes, we are electrocuting that person's leg ever so gently. And this is the basis on which the muscles are being contracted, and then they're just doing exercise. What's great with this is that their own muscles are contracting. So they get cardiovascular benefits as well as range of motion. So in terms of rehabilitation, very simple tool, straightforward to use, and very efficacious in delivering a benefit. But it's relatively limited in its functionality. More modern versions of it will integrate the person with an avatar, the avatar cycling into races, so they can race against their previous best performance or race against each other. And each time it's down to them to try to pedal as hard as they can, but then they benefit from the electrical stimulation. So the rate at which the avatar is moving is still entirely driven by the person's own efforts. I'd like to point out that this young person has a complete spinal cord injury. So he's using a wheelchair for his displacement. He's not capable of taking any steps. And you're going to see how fit his upper body is. So this is a person that takes care of their fitness, and their only opportunity to do this is to use electrical stimulation for moving their legs. They cannot otherwise move their legs. And this sort of electrical stimulation devices doesn't look anywhere near as impressive as some of the things you see in more recent movies, but they're out there in hospitals across the world. They're delivering life-changing interventions right now. They're not life-saving, they are life-changing. They're making people like the volunteer in this study feeling better about themselves, their legs, and this influences their whole cardiovascular well-being, bladder, bowel control. A lot of other things come from benefiting from this technology. This is an old photo. No, it's not that in the UK people still dress like that. It's a photo that's about 20 years ago. But I just want to illustrate something. This person was one of the first person to receive an implant to stimulate their spinal cord. Using that, she was able to cycle without having electrodes stuck on her legs, like I showed the previous people. So all of the stimulation was delivered at the level of the spinal cord. But this was done in the late 1990s, actually quite 30 years ago. And I want you to just remember Onward ARC, this device, because the same or very similar method to the one that Julie Hill benefited from are still being used today very successfully. And I'm just going to show you that in a moment. So before I move on to this, I showed you some examples of electrical stimulation for the lower limb a moment ago. They can also be used for upper limb. And this is a typical test of upper limb dexterity performed as part of rehabilitation. So we see them there. We also see devices that try to make this easier to use for a patient. Now imagine that you have limited finger dexterity. Trust me, placing these 4 electrodes in the right location is not easy. So instead of having to do that and then deal with cables and deal with the external equipment, you can see commercial devices like this hand rehabilitation system. This one is offered by a company called Bioness, so you can buy it. And if you go on their website, the Bioness's website, you're going to see some fantastic witness statement or statements of people whose life has been changed by using technologies like that. Here, it's really designed to be used by a person who has limited dexterity. So it folds over. It's got a quite sci-fi move in the way that it closes around the arm very gently and then turns on, the little light turns on when it's providing stimulation and controlling or helping the person control their hand. So some really nice devices out there. Now I want to talk about, I'm moving from upper arm to amputation here. This is what a recent reboot of Mad Max told us amputees would like to look like. I don't know that this was done in consultation with a lot of the people in the community, in the amputee community, but certainly this is what a commercial company, Ottobock being one of the bigger producers of upper limb orthoses and prostheses, this is what they're doing. This kind of prosthesis is capable of recording signals from muscles using machine learning, that's the old name for artificial intelligence, machine learning and pattern recognition to detect the person's intention and then to control the movement of the fingers. Now, just to give you an idea of how does this work, this is a person being fitted. So this is another company, Bionic. I have no commercial interest in any of the companies. I use the photos that to me are the most representative of what I want to talk about. I don't make statements specifically about one or the other. This is the fitting stage. What you can see here is a range of electrodes are placed around the stump in a very manual way to start with to identify the position of each of these electrodes. This position is personal to every amputee, and over their lifetime, the position will change as the stump changes. The positions are tested with, in this case, a wired connection to a test hand. So they'll be working with the future wearer of the device until they find a suitable position, and then this position is transferred to position in the stump. And this is what we see here. Each of these metal, shiny gray metal parts here is an electrode. Then the electronics is present in, this is a clear prosthetic, but that's the space housing the electronics and then controlling the device. This is another example, again, showing you all of the electronics here, controlling the device and some of the robotic assistance that's provided to move the hand. So these devices can perform a relatively good range of movement. And most of them are instrumented with sensors because the person themselves do not receive haptic feedback. So if you're going to pick up a grape, for example, you want to know that you're not going to crush it, but you also have capability of picking up a glass filled with a pint of beer, and that is much heavier than your grape. So you also want to be able to exert enough pressure so that it doesn't slide. So the pressure adjustments are impossible if you don't have your haptic feedback. And so these prostheses themselves have to be intelligent, and you have a degree of shared control. The user indicates an intention to do a movement and trusts the device to share the control and act appropriately. And the word trust here is essential. The amount of training that goes into using these devices is essential to avoid abandonment when a user stops using the device because it doesn't work as it wanted it to be. If this doesn't work, you're better off with a passive prosthesis. At least it's always in the position that you expect it to be. It's always in the shape that you expect it to have. So a lot of users of devices like that who aren't supported for long enough, who aren't trained for long enough, will abandon using them and then revert to entirely passive devices. Here's another example of another company. I like that picture. That's the Hero arm. So that's another one. They've focused a lot on younger people and on reversing the idea of body shaming around the use of orthosis. So they want you to wear it with pride, feeling good about it. It's colorful. They've made all sorts built to resemble superheroes' arms and things like that. So with color codes that are associated with mangas and with other such cartoons. So we see them fantastic. I also think this is great because it illustrates the importance of training. You and I, and most of us, would never need to train to be able to perform that very movement. So, this is personalized medicine. This is when it's driven by the goals of the users to personalize the intervention to their needs to prevent abandonment. So moving on from all of the things that are out there now, I'm going to finish this talk with brain-computer interfaces, because frankly, how could I not? So we're going to talk very briefly about this. I think I've got about 5 minutes left, I'm hoping. So this is your media representation of brain-computer interfaces, and it's wrong in many ways, but the main reason why it's so wrong, it's because it assumes that there is one position in the brain that seemingly controls everywhere else. Like there was a center in the brain, but there isn't a center in the brain. The brain has all sorts of different roles organized in different areas. And so when you place, this is the real size, by the way, that's the AI-generated drawing. This is the real size. You can all look at your thumb right now, and you can imagine how small this is. It's about 100 electrodes on this array. So all you can do, if you insert one of this, is target an area the size of about 1/10 of your thumb. And if you're trying to target multiple areas, you're going to have to implement multiple one of those. And this would be okay. You have a small cable. But then, so if you're trying to sort of control different muscles and then also provide some haptic feedback and some looking at some intentions, you might just try to target different areas. Problem is that each of these small devices is connected to a large connector, which then has to be clamped with an even larger external part to connect to the very large computer that processes all of the data. And so we go from something tiny platinum tip, to 100+ electrode array. That's 1/10 of the size of your thumb. And this is this relative size of the connector. And this is what they call the connector pedestal. Let me translate this for you and I. This sticks out of their head 24/7. This is never removed. It sticks out. These patients live with a pedestal that sticks out. Now, the big gray bit here, that's added only when they want to use the device. So once they have these, they are trained for hundreds of hours, where the little white arrow here, so one of these circles will go green, and they have to try to move this white arrow onto the circle by thinking up, 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 right, 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 and then the other bullet will go green, and they think left and up again and things like that. And after hours, the computer knows. What they're basically doing is they're teaching the computer their own brain's alphabet. They're teaching the computer to read their thoughts, but only the thoughts that they have had repeatedly. This is really teaching the alphabet to the machine, because your own alphabet is unique to yourself and unique to the position of these electrodes in your own brain. Meaning, for anyone who's worried about computers reading your thoughts, Yes, provided you've spent hours with said computer teaching it the alphabet. So then they can do it, and they can do it really remarkably well. Now, not everybody is happy with this pedestal sticking out approach. And so we see a lot of efforts towards implantable devices. So this is the WIMAGINE, which is developed in France by Louis Benabib and team. And take it from me, this person doesn't have something sticking out of the back of their head. It's difficult to find pictures of people's head front and back. So I have one patient with it from the front, and then another patient with the same implant showing you the side. They wear this helmet because the connection to the computer still requires to be wired. But when they remove the helmet, there's absolutely nothing that distinguishes them from anybody else's. So now I told you Onward ARC, remember that? So this is the WIMAGINE. This is the brain-computer interface. Now you can use the brain-computer interface to control a computer, but what if you used it to control an implant over your spinal cord that enables you to move your leg? So you'd think about moving your leg, and then this one would help you move your legs. And so this is what this person has. Now I'm not going to play videos, I'm out of time, so I'm just going to show you a few more examples of other people who have done this in other countries, because I said I wanted to show you that this was a global phenomenon. But Google, Palab Ghosh, he's the BBC presenter, but you find a lot of other reports of such fantastically empowering changes that research is enabling. So this is done in China. They've miniaturized everything. So here's your person, the external part, always wearable, but when they remove it, there is nothing left here, nothing visible. And then another approach by Synchron is to use an intravenous approach. So rather than having surgery that requires penetration of the electrodes into the brain, they're using the venous system as a port of entry. That's so much less invasive. And they've miniaturized the electrodes so that all of these are little electrodes connected to the wire. This is your typical stent, but with an added wire to carry the signals. And they're using it to control a computer here. This person's using it to control electrical stimulation to enable their arm to move. So each time, the location of the array in the brain decides which area, what you're learning, basically, which third you can read. This is the Neuralink slide. Why do I present you? Well, I can't talk about BCIs without talking about Neuralink. So just to give you an idea of dimension, these electrodes are very short. So when you heard that the first patient with the first participant, had some of the electrodes had lifted, you can understand why the slightest movement loses contact. I finish with this slide because a lot of people have criticized him for playing a game. Now, I'd like to ask you, if you have a spinal cord injury or a condition that keeps you with such limited mobility that you are dependent on another person to feed you, to dress you, to do everything for you, how much fun is it to play a game where by telling somebody else, click here, do that, go left, move faster, no, change your mind, no, that's not what I wanted to do, change again, no, open this mode, what did it say? Can you read the bubble again? I mean, come on, this guy played 15 hours solid because that's what he was missing the most. And you can see from a person's well-being, a person's enjoyment. I told you my first slide was that we want to improve people's quality of life. So let us not criticize what makes people happy just because we feel that 100+ million investment should have been used for something more worthwhile. It's improving their quality of life. It's making them happy. So I'm aware that I've run a little bit over time. I apologize. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I'm speechless. This is breathtaking, and I'm very, very, very happy that you showed such indeed improvement of quality of life of these patients. And this is really true innovation, patient-centered, driven by patients. And my God, I'm speechless. It doesn't happen a lot.
Well, thank you.
Yes, really. I wanted to ask, I'm looking at the Q&A. Not a question. It's an anonymous person or program participant. Not a question, but really clear and interesting presentation. Congrats and thank you. Thank you for this feedback, whoever you are. I am too speechless, really. If there are any questions from the program participants, don't hesitate to raise your hands, raise your voice.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can be on video. If I can find stop sharing.
And I will very, very quickly share my slides, just because, do you see my slides?
Yeah.
Assume, yes. Just to show you, or to show at least the patients, the program participants, sorry, that throughout this, as usual, throughout the whole day, I made for you some concluding remarks. I just wanted to point out, because the previous speaker, Professor Damia Laoui, talked about nivolumab, and this was actually also something I already included with respect to the chain of patents. I think it was a question from Diego this morning. So I made some closing remarks, and here I included my, I would say, short summary for the students for you. And I really, again, stated through patient-centric innovation, patient-driven and personalized. And I actually thank you for including this, because it really shows, and this is what I tell them, I would say the first module, but also definitely yesterday, that this is not a linear process. It's really continuous, going back and forth to include and to listen to the patient's voice, and to include their opinions, their feelings, their whatever their experiences, because indeed only then we can turn an invention into true patient-centered innovation. I'm very, very happy to have heard this. Well, the whole afternoon was, I think, fascinating through interdisciplinary research that drives innovation, and this is what we have. I'm also very happy that you're very enthusiastic. I like it. It's something I feel that inspires students a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
It's an honor. I'm very, very happy that you were able to present. And I think, well, I already know that some of the students will come back to us saying this is truly fascinating. And this is what they need to see in this program, that indeed collaboration between different, I would say, experts in the field can really change the life of patients, not only save it, as you rightfully stated. Thank you to all of you. Most of the students I will see on the 28th of March, but those who follow or who chose to apply for the certificate process, we see each other next Friday at Campus Erasmus. Thank you again, Professor Van Oostenberg, for being with us, to all the program participants, and to you as well. I wish you a very nice, sunny weekend. Thank you. Bye.